The bells are ringing for me and my gal. The birds are singing for me and my gal. Everybody's been knowing to a wedding they're going.
ご機嫌いかがですか? Watanabe Dan desu. On tonight's episode of Alt Cinema, we're going to be taking a look at Gene Kelly. Now, when you hear the name of Gene Kelly, what do you think of? You think of very, very happy musicals. You think of Singing in the Rain. You think of An American in Paris. You think of On the Town and many other films where Gene's rather exuberant personality and all of that was a very bright thing, something that we associate with happiness. But this is probably one of the biggest secrets of the way musicals work, because Gene Kelly, as an actor, was very innovative in the way he allowed himself to be portrayed. Remember, his career started in the 1940s. So when we think of what actors were considered to be at that time, they were considered to be people who would play overall very bright and very happy roles, especially if they wanted to be in a genre such as a musical. But Gene Kelly never really settled for that, and he was willing to take risks that other actors, even in dramas, weren't quite willing to take at that period unless they happened to look like Humphrey Bogart and had that thuggish quality. And on a certain level, Gene Kelly could be said to have that thuggish quality, but it certainly wasn't something that, in general, people who know who he is today would relate to him as being one of his primary characteristics. We're going to examine two of his films today, and both of them showcase exactly how innovative he was as both a performer and an innovator. The first of the two films is his very first film. It's For Me and My Gal, which was a Judy Garland vehicle. She was just 20 years old, 2 years out of Wizard of Oz, and they were ready to make her into more of an adult star. She'd already proven herself in Ziegfeld Girl, that she could hold the screen against such beauties as Hedy Lamarr and Lana Turner, which, although they were pressing Judy down a little bit in terms of her own sense of security of her looks, she certainly was able to walk away with the picture. Now, she had seen Pal Joey in New York and had made efforts with the MGM studio to bring Kelly over. And the thing about Kelly was, in Pal Joey, he played someone who was a heel. He played someone who was selfish and unappealing, but yet incredibly charismatic. And Kelly decided to allow that side of his personality to remain consistent even in Hollywood. Now, For Me and My Gal is often disregarded today as being, just a typical studio musical that happened to introduce Gene Kelly. But when we look at it more closely, we see that it's one of the most surprising musicals MGM ever made. Being released in 1942, while World War II had just started in terms of the U.S. involvement, it's a movie that has as its central character Gene Kelly as someone who is actively unappealing as a human being. When he's first introduced, he's flirtatious, he's arrogant, he makes the girls in the vaudeville house take the upstairs dressing room because he has to be the star. And his very forcefulness and personality rubs Judy the wrong way. But, as always, we see that Judy is attracted to him. We see that even at this stage in her career, she herself was being innovated, was playing the almost willful victim of what other people were willing to do to her, being overly generous, being overly giving, until that person crosses a line. And for someone who was just 19, moving on to 20 during the course of the production, it was surprising for her. But it was even more surprising for Gene, because to play someone who was so unappealing could have stopped his career in its tracks, and yet he kept up. And as we see in this brief dance sequence here, we see him putting the full force of all of the tricks he would later use in his other movies all at once. And he does it in the persona of a clown, kind of foreshadowing his and Judy's performance in Be a Clown and The Pirate, which would be a movie where he would attempt to return the favor of her being such a champion for him earlier in his career by trying to save her at the lowest point in hers. I mean, he put up with her when she was in both The Pirate and Summerstock, which drove one husband out the door and drove one of a Hollywood director into a nervous breakdown. So we see that Gene had an incredible quality in terms of his private life as well. But look at what he does as Harry. He, at one point, is willing to go with Marta Keller, who is an opera singer, who is tempting him to move on with her. But, and he even considers it, because he's that into his own self. He's that into what he wants, and not really concerned about anyone else. We see the hints of World War I coming, and he's completely oblivious to it, completely oblivious to what anyone else is doing. And Judy's character loses her brother during the war, and Gene, on finding out he's drafted, is willing to cripple himself. He slams his hand inside a trunk in order to avoid the draft. And when Judy finds out that that's what he's done, she says she never wants to see him again.
You're always acting. But you'll never make the big time. Because you're small time in your heart.
And we as an audience are kind of feeling the same way. In fact, we wonder why she is so hooked on him. She wonders it herself.
It's way down deep inside of me. He's wrong and I love him. He's right and I love him. It's no good.
MGM, sensing that they might have a problem because he's so negative as a character, of course, turns him into a hero, and he rescues a battalion and proves himself to be very worthy of the happy ending he and Garland have. And I don't think I've ever seen a movie from MGM in this genre that was so willing to play with that noirish element of a woman who's in love with a bad man. And yes, he appears to be cured. He appears to be a nicer guy, but can we really trust his change? And I do hand it to Kelly for being that brave early in his career.
And every mother's son of you, that means you and you and you and you. Give a cheer for the boys in the camp. Give a cheer. You gotta get up and make some noise.
The second film we're going to be looking at is Singing in the Rain. Now, I know that the very thought that Singing in the Rain is in any way a dark movie seems antithetical. It seems completely out of expectation. But yet, remember, Singing in the Rain is coming right on the heels of Sunset Boulevard. And it takes a look at Hollywood with a satiric air, but not a rose-colored glasses air. When That's Entertainment was made in the 1970s, and was a surprise hit, in fact, the Sing in the Rain number is the only number in the picture that is done full, that has no cuts in it. And we see why. Because it has that simplicity and that exuberance and that joy that the Gene Kelly character has. And we see other numbers that are equally innovative, like The Coming of Sound does this great mockery of the early days of Hollywood talkies and the kind of numbers that were done. And it's spot on in that parody. And later on, we have the Broadway ballet. Now, I'll be honest with you, I tend to not like big ballet numbers in any musical. In fact, I think big ballet numbers in general tend to ruin the movie musical more than anything else, especially when they take up so much of the running time. Look at Hello Dolly, which was directed by Kelly. Hello Dolly has endless musical numbers in it. The Broadway ballet in this, though, is interesting because it shows a hoofer who goes from nothing into being a star, and it mirrors not only the character Don's life and the fact that he did start with nothing and had to work his way up and fell in love with the wrong woman and all of that, but it also mirrors what Kelly went through. And we see at the end when he's dancing among the other stars and then he's separated out and isolated, it's at once a celebration of what it is to be a star persona, but it's also a very egotistical moment. And it reminds us that Kelly, as a dancer, was someone who was, shall we say, less than sympathetic towards dancers who were, quote-unquote, light on their feet. Why? Is it because Kelly himself had been accused of that? In fact, he seemed to spend great chunks of his life making dance appear masculine. So there is this weird side to his personality that doesn't necessarily jive with the happiness of the rest of Singing in the Rain. But the movie, nevertheless, remains fascinating because of the way it plays the real changes in Hollywood and how it plays with the same destructive behavior among its denizens, you know, in a way that both A Star is Born and Sunset Boulevard started. The fun masks a heart of darkness in this film, and we see that at the very beginning. We're at a premiere, and we see the Gene Kelly character arrive with his entourage, including Donald O'Connor, who I guess you could say is a stand-in for Stanley Donen, who happens to be the director of the film. He was Gene's protege when Gene was on stage in Pal Joey, and actually came out to Hollywood with him when he was still a late teenager, and would eventually work his way up to becoming one of Hollywood's best directors. Yet, in Singing in the Rain, he was willing to really bring out the satiric side of the material without compromising on the dark side of what is also being depicted. At this premiere, we see Gene Kelly giving a recitation of his career about how he was all about dignity, and we see that it wasn't about dignity at all, that he's actually kind of a con man, and that he went from being a stuntman to being this big movie star. And in the process of it, we're introduced to Lena Lamont.
For heaven's sake, what's the big idea? Can't a girl get a word in edgewise?
Who throughout the film is played as a comedic character. She's a big star, yet she has a squeaky voice. And it is here that the film really makes its statement, because Lena Lamont is Norma Desmond. She's someone whose career, as fantastic as she is, as charismatic as she has to be on screen, is a problematic personality. And that problematic personality is not going to do her well when the going gets tough. And yet, there are people who are agents of her defeat in it. And the people who are the agents of her defeat are all of the men around her. On the one hand, we have Gene Kelly, who plays someone who, remember, was a stuntman while she was a big star. And he treats her very high-handedly. She's obviously interested in him, but he's not interested in her at all. And we get that it's because she's an unpleasant person. But is he a pleasant person? No. He's actually quite he's quite a bad guy in this. Almost as bad as he is in For Me and My Gal in terms of his actual value structure. He's very into his own thing and taking care of number one. What happens with Lena is that with the coming of sound, she is not going to make the transition because she has a squeaky voice. And I can't help when I'm watching this film not feeling sorry for her, because she is ill-equipped for what life is about to throw her way. And she does what anybody would do when presented with the fact that her career is under stress. She behaves somewhat inappropriately by being tyrannical. And the way she's tyrannical is that the Gene Kelly character has met a girl who's young and who's innocent, seemingly, and who right now is popping out of cakes. This is Debbie Reynolds, and Debbie Reynolds is very pert and cute in her first film, and she just walks away with the picture. She's so vibrant and attentive and full of life, and yet her character is not honest either. She first plays to Kelly that she's not interested in movie stars, but yet we find out that she is interested in them. She pretends to be an actress, yet she's popping out of cakes. And popping out of cakes then meant the same thing it means today. So we figure that she's not necessarily the innocent, virginal ingenue that she's pretending to be. Lena sees that Don is interested in her. And while it's played as jealousy for Don, the Gene Kelly character, we get that no. She sees this girl as an existential threat to her career, and since Lena knows her career is her entire identity, she is going to battle her. She tries to get her fired, but because of her relationship with Kelly, Debbie Reynolds keeps coming back. And in fact, with the help of the studio boss, they systematically plan the downfall of Lena's career. And Lena is meant to appear ungenerous when Kathy, the Debbie Reynolds character, dubs her voice, that she wants her to keep this up. And while that's depicted as being unsympathetic, is it really? No! This is her career. She's the big star. She's the reason the studio is still around. When Millard Mitchell says, "Oh, you want this to be Lena Lamont Studios?" and she says, "Yes."
I could sue you for the whole studio.
Why, that's a lot of nonsense.
Says so. Right here. Contract dated June 8, 1925, paragraph 34, subdivision letter A. The party of the first part, that's me.
You win, Lena.
Guess what? There's the littlest hint in there that the studio is there because of her. So the fact that these guys are engineering her career downfall is unsympathetic. And when there is the happy ending with Debbie Reynolds and becoming a star and Gene Kelly and she apparently having a happy ending, there is a part of us looking at this and going, but, and realizing that they're doing this on the back of Lena. And that is why Gene Kelly was brave, because we still like him in spite of it.
I'm singing in the rain, just singing in the rain.